I am pretty excited for today's video. I am going to be going through all of the major updates in the history of old school RuneScape and making a little tier list of it. It was honestly such a nice walk down memory lane looking through the archive of all the updates. It's insane just how much content has been released over the past 13 years or so. So I'm going to be going in chronological order, starting way back when in 2013, so let's jump into it. So the very first large update that came into the game after the release of Old School was the not-so-beloved Nightmare Zone. I did consider leaving this off the list since it's not terribly impactful in the current state of the game, but if you played way back in the day, you know exactly what Nightmare Zone is and how prevalent it was in many players' accounts. The idea of the minigame is pretty cool, being able to replay quest bosses, but the implementation left a lot to be desired. It's ugly, it's in a very random place in the game, and it also created the infamous 6-hour AFK Guthans meta for training up your combat. I can't really put this above the F tier because of those reasons, so we are going to be starting on a negative note and doing just that. It's worth noting that the team was extremely small at the time, so it's hard to really blame them for having this half-baked content update, but that's not really something that's going to sway my placement. Shortly after Nightmare Zone, we saw the release of God War's Dungeon. Considering where the game was at the time of release, I think this was a quintessential update in keeping players interested in the game because it introduced more aspirational, team-based content that players could strive for, past things like Barrows and Caliphite Queen. In the current day, God Wars definitely shows its age and isn't quite up to snuff with other boss encounters, but I do think this update was important and exciting for when it was released. I'm going to put it at the B tier. It's definitely not perfect content. The long respawn timers and room KCing can make it a bit of a snoozer, but it's not bad content either, and it's unique, iconic, and important to the progression of an account even today. Next up is one that I almost missed, but it's definitely worth calling out, and that is the changes to death mechanics in the game. So this came out through a series of tweaks over a long period of time instead of one large update, but basically Jagex gradually shifted over from having loot appear on the ground to everyone, to only allowing the player that died to pick up their loot. For some players, I know that they miss the nostalgia of watching someone die and then having the excitement of waiting for their loot to appear, but the whole reason for this change is that the game was going through severe DDoS attempts because the player base was getting smarter and trying to exploit this mechanic to take people's items. So this was done in an effort to reduce the incentive of DDoSers, but it also came with the really cool side effect that players were more willing to take risks in the game. And I think this is actually a pretty important foundational piece to how PVM is today. If we never changed death mechanics, min-maxing PVM encounters would be considered highly risky and downright stupid in a lot of places. And I believe we would have seen much less emergent gameplay come out through the years. So because of all this, I'm actually going to put this into the A tier. On the surface, it sounds like a minimal change, but it kind of unlocked the next level of combat in the game, and also improved server stability. Moving on to pets. So in April 2014, it was actually just pet singular. This is when the Chaos Elemental pet got added. Down the line, other skilling and boss pets were introduced, but I'm just going to group it all together for the sake of simplicity. This fits pretty comfortably into A tier for me. It's one of those things that doesn't shape any kind of core gameplay loop, so there's really no possibility of a large downside, but it gives such a huge dopamine hit whenever you get a pet, and also gives a lot of endgame players long-term goals for collecting their favorite pets. For some people, it's a stupid little cosmetic that feels kind of nice when you get it, and for others, it's the entire reason that they play the game. So it's all upside to me, and overall was an amazing update to the game. Next up, the big one, Iron Man mode. I'm sure there are people out there that would put this into F tier, and they might even have a somewhat reasonable argument for it, but in my opinion, Iron Man is one of, if not the best updates in the entire history of the game. So I'm going to swiftly move this up to the S tier. So my reasoning for this is that when you play an Iron Man, it completely reshapes what the game has to offer. Every skill, boss, and minigame has rewards that actually mean something instead of just getting converted to GP per hour or XP per hour. For a lot of players that switched from being a main to an Iron Man, they weren't able to turn off that efficiency-minded portion in their brain and just enjoy the game for what it was and do the content they wanted to do. I remember back in the day before I made an Iron, I would just sit at Zulrah all day, every day, because actually going out and having fun, trying out new content would make less money and make my goals take more time. And honestly, it's a bit of a skill issue. Like, we're playing a game and I was forcing myself to treat it like a job. So what Iron Man did for myself, and I'm sure many others, is it forced us to really dive into the depth of the game and experience all of the different styles of content instead of just focusing on what the best moneymaker was. Now, if you don't like Iron Man, all the power to you. I'm not hating on mains whatsoever. I just think that this game mode really brought to light the diversity that the game has to offer, and is one of the core reasons that it's thriving so much today. Now, I did just mention Zulrah, and the next major update on this list here is Zulrah. So when I first had the idea for this video, Zulrah was one of those things that popped in my head and I was like, oh man, that's gonna be hard to rank. And my reasoning for this is that there's kind of two sides to the puzzle. First, we have the fight itself. Zulrah was absolutely groundbreaking in terms of combat mechanics upon its release. You have to prayer switch and gear switch according to the phase of the fight, instead of just clicking the monster and eating when your HP is low. Even today, I imagine it is relatively daunting to fight for the first time, which says a lot about the difficulty level of the fight at the time of release. So I think this really set the stage for how deep combat can go in old school, and was a really positive update in that regard. However, on the flip side, we do have to talk about the drop table. Because this fight was so difficult at the time of release, it was also insanely busted in terms of the common loot. For Iron Man, it completely solved food, herb lore, farming, construction, raw GP, prayer, smithing. The list is honestly insane when you think about it. So for some players, they liked this because hard content should be rewarding, but it was extremely overtuned and redefined the expectations of all boss loot going forward. Zulrah kind of marked the shift to PvM-scape because once players got a taste of it, they didn't want to go back to picking flax or crafting nature runes. So as far as actually placing a rating on this content, I'm torn between B and C, but I'm going to place it into B. I think that the upside of expanding the depth of combat and PvM in the game greatly outweighs the downside of devaluing skilling and old moneymakers. That's just my opinion. I could see a valid reason for putting this honestly anywhere on the tier list. Next up, we have the Grand Exchange. So I have been an Iron Man for a while, so I'm probably not terribly qualified to have an opinion here, but I did play a main both before and after the GE was introduced. My take here is pretty straightforward. The GE is good. It's a convenience, it doesn't waste your time, and it makes it harder for scammers to scam. There's probably something to be said about the nostalgia of bank sales, but as full-grown adults, I would imagine many of us would say that they would prefer to have the GE rather than not. So I'll put this into the A tier. Achievement Diaries were the next major update after this, and I have somewhat mixed feelings about this one. I think that they provide a good goal to strive for between Quest Cape and Max Cape, but at the same time, they're not something that I think was incredibly impactful to the game. There are annoying inconsistencies between the Karamja diary and the other diaries, and some of the rewards they feel out of place, like various agility shortcuts and the Drayman staff requirement removal. So I'm going to put this into the C tier. I think that it could have been implemented in a better way, and there are just too many arbitrary things attached to them that feel kind of odd, for lack of a better word. Next up is a big grouping of updates, since I didn't want them to all have an individual slot, and that grouping is Slayer bosses. Mainly Slayer bosses introduced early on, so Kraken, Cerberus, Sire, Grotesque Guardians, Thermi, etc. These got pumped out pretty frequently near the start of the game, and definitely served a valid purpose to provide lofty goals and solid moneymakers for more progressed accounts, while introducing some power creep that pushed the game forward in terms of power level. However, the bosses are also quite simple and janky and don't really hold up with current day bosses with interesting mechanics. So I'll put this in C as well. They don't feel bad enough to slot into D, but at the same time there is a lot I would change about them if I could. Max Cape and Skill Cape perks are next, and this is a bit of a divisive one. I think there are two camps. There are people that argue that yes, the Max Cape and Skill Capes should be rewarding since it's such a massive accomplishment, and then the other side where people say that the rewards are so good that it feels like the Max Cape is more of an obligation than something to go for if you want to. Personally, I actually think it's pretty well balanced. Yes, the Max Cape is very powerful in terms of convenience, but I don't think it's so broken that it's something that you can't live without if you just despise skilling. So I'm going to put this in the B tier. I love that it's in the game, but it's not game-shifting impactful enough to warrant an A tier in my opinion. Moving on to our first temporary game mode, Deadman Mode. I was honestly super surprised that this first came out in 2015. It is way older than I expected. I am not a Deadman Man player, so I can't really speak too much of it, but overall I'm not a fan of PvP in this game, and since this list is subjective, this is going to go into the D tier for me personally. I know some people love it, but given the many issues that they've had with the finales and the fact that it's just something that doesn't interest me, I wouldn't mind if it just didn't exist. The main reason it's D tier instead of F tier for me is because I do think a lot of good content comes out of it, and that brings more eyes to the game, which is definitely a positive thing. Next up, we have our first major area expansion in the game, which is Kourend. When it was first released, it was very bare bones, but like many other sections, I'm going to be looking at the area holistically in its current state, including the Kebos lowlands. The exception here is Chambers, since that's obviously a large enough update to warrant its own ranking. But yeah, Kourend has seen a lot of improvements over time, but looking at the list of activities, I'm still not super impressed with the content in the region. Some updates I enjoy here are the Catacombs, Konar, the Farming Guild, and Blood Rune crafting. But on the other hand, we have Shamans, Wintertodt, Teeth Farm, Aerial Fishing, and Blast Furnace. Honestly, a lot of the content here falls just into the mid category for me, and because of that, I'm going to put this at the C tier. I think it's great that we're actively expanding the old school map, but Kourend specifically just feels not super impressive to me. Next up is the first Grandmaster quest that Old School saw, which is Monkey Madness 2. So with this quest, you get access to demonic gorillas and Zenites, as well as maniacal monkey hunting. While it's cool that the team released a Grandmaster quest, this is going to go into the D tier for me. Demonics themselves are more annoying than interesting to kill, and maniacal monkey hunting is pretty dead content. In addition to that, the super high crafting level requirement for Zenites made future crafting updates pretty awkward in how we've recently received upgrades in the form of the Rancor and Rupture. Let's now talk about clue expansions in the game. We've seen a lot of clue updates over the years with Elites, Masters, Watson, Stash Units, and more recently, Stackable Clues. I'll include them all here in just a blanketed clue expansion tile. So personally, I love clues, and I think that Jagex has done a good job with keeping them interesting over time. Stash Units and Stackable Clues specifically, I am massive fans of, and Elites and Masters are super cool to give even more variety to the content. I know that clues aren't for everyone, but for those that like to do them and get that dopamine hit of pulling something rare, I think that the updates to them in OSRS have been good. I'll put this into the B tier. I don't think the expansions have been impactful enough to warrant an A tier placement for me, but I'm definitely happy with the changes that have come out overall. For the next section, we have Hardcore Iron Man. I've never really played a hardcore past a month or so of playtime, as I prefer long-term, relaxed progression over anything super high risk, but I do still rate this update pretty highly. Like the release of normal Iron Man, this unlocked a completely new style of gameplay that really scratches an itch that a lot of players had. I know multiple people that will only play hardcores because they're addicted to that rush of knowing that every encounter has something on the line. And especially with the newer updates to the game mode, with teleport crystals protecting hardcores from disconnections, I think that this is just an awesome addition to the game that offers an extremely unique style of play for a lot of people, with no real apparent downside. So I'm going to put this into A tier. Now, believe it or not, we're only at 2017, but we're going to be moving a bit quicker through the releases at this point because the development cycle tended to slow down a bit, and an emphasis on quality and QOL was definitely prioritized over just pumping out content. But this is a big one. We have our first raid of Old School, the Chambers of Xeric. So raiding in general is an absolutely massive part of the game now. It's one of the few activities that really emphasizes long, complex encounters, hunting extremely rare items, and socializing with your friends while playing the game. Without raiding, I don't think that Old School would be nearly as successful, and Chambers is obviously what really kicked this off. So I am tempted to put this into S tier because of the impact it had on the game's direction, but I am actually going to drop it into A because of a few reasons. One is that many of the rooms in Chambers are really not that great. Most of the puzzle rooms and a lot of the combat rooms are kind of one-dimensional in my opinion. The Olm fight though, specifically Solo Olm, is an absolute masterpiece. But on top of all this, the loot table is pretty bloated, and highly desired items like the Twisted Bow and Full Ancestral are just way too rare. So I think for these reasons, I can't quite put it at S tier, but I can definitely see an argument for it. So the 2017-2018 era is what a lot of people classify as the golden age of RuneScape, so to no surprise, we have another absolute banger that came right after Chambers, the Inferno. This goes very easily into S tier for me, not because I'm some kind of Inferno-obsessed maniac, but because this is very clearly the point in time in which the level of PvM difficulty and depth elevated in the game. Zulrah and Chambers were definitely updates that started pushing players into that direction, but Inferno took things to a whole new level. The jump from fight caves to Inferno is like going from killing a goblin to taking on bandos. It's an insanely hard challenge, and even after nearly 10 years, it still gives players seeking their first Infernal Cape tons of trouble. It's one of the only activities in the game that you can take months to practice to get your first completion, and then the feeling you get after you finally take down Zuck is just unlike anything else in the entire game. I absolutely love that Jagex had the balls to put something like this that was so difficult into the game that they knew would frustrate players, because it created this whole new idea of aspirational content and really highlighted that Old School RuneScape, despite looking so simple on the surface, can be really hard. Next up after this is a bit of a miss in my opinion, and that is Fossil Island. This was a smaller area expansion that gave us some content like birdhouses, volcanic mine, Fossil Island wyverns, and herbivore, and deranged archaeologist, if anyone ever kills that. None of this content is really all that exciting, and I especially hate how birdhouses became an hourly scape meta for Hunter. So this is going to go into the D tier for me. I think it has potential for F tier, but I know a lot of people do really like Volcanic Mine, so I can't classify this update as a complete failure. We now have our next Grandmaster quest, Dragon Slayer 2. So this gave us a pretty large amount of new content. We saw Vorkath, Wrath Runes, Adian Rune Dragons, and later on Ferocious Gloves. Similar to Monkey Madness 2, although a sequel to such an iconic quest is very hype, I wasn't super impressed with what came out alongside of it. Jagex kind of doubled down on the super profitable common loot tables with Vorkath, and Wrath Runes and Adi Dragons and Rune Dragons are still somewhat dead content. The Ava's Assembler is a nice part of the progression path for range now, but I don't really think I can go above C tier for this update. I think it was better executed than Monkey Madness 2, but there wasn't really enough good stuff in here for me to give this a super good rating. Next up is the second raid of Old School, and in my opinion, the best raid of the game, the Theater of Blood. This to me is easily an S tier update. The team absolutely nailed the implementation of this raid by making it extremely fun and team-based, while not being overly complex or too prescriptive in the various boss fights. It's also a step up in difficulty from Chambers, while having more punishing death mechanics that make the learning curve feel all the better. The only downside of this raid is that many of the rewards, such as Justy, are dead content, but to me that's not quite enough to knock it down below S tier. The content is just so amazing that this can't be anything less than one of the best updates of all time. And speaking of best updates of all time, we have the collection log as the next major update. So I myself am a filthy clogger, so this is also going to go into the S tier. Like many other updates in this category, this falls into the same camp of really shaping the future of the game in a positive way, and allowing players to escape the monotony of their normal gameplay loops. The collection log gives players an excuse to play as a completionist and experience all the content the game has to offer, by just giving us a simple way to track all of the unique items you've gathered over your account's journey. Even if clogging isn't your main priority in the game, making this form of steady, slow progress really aligns with the core identity of Old School and is just a 10 out of 10 update in my opinion. And 2018 really was an incredible year because after the collection log, we had the release of mobile. Now, I don't even have the mobile app downloaded, as I much prefer to just play when I'm at the computer, but mobile was an incredible way to expand the player base. At the time of mobile release, we saw a massive spike in player count, which is always a good thing. I'll put this at the A tier. I think there's definitely an argument to be made for S tier, but given that it's an update that I don't personally interact with at all, it's hard for me to put this at the same level as the other powerhouses. Moving on to another Grandmaster quest, we next see the release of Song of the Elves and Prith. So to me, this is definitely a step up from the previous two Grandmaster quests. We saw very impactful content come out this quest with Gauntlet, Zalcano, and Divine Potions. I know people have mixed feelings about some of this content, but personally, I am an enjoyer of both Gauntlet and Zalcano, so I'm going to put this at the B tier. My reasoning for not having this higher is that the Bofa kind of put a stranglehold on the ranged meta that we're still feeling the effects of today. It's just such a well-rounded item that it made a lot of Iron Men feel forced to go for it to progress efficiently. And in a game where player choice is generally something that should be emphasized, dominant metas are a sign of imperfect game design. That being said though, I do really like the content, which I know isn't a universal opinion, but this is my tier list. So after Song of the Elves, we saw the first leagues come into the game. And like other sections, I will be grouping all of the leagues together in general. So I was late to the party with leagues, but for the past 3 seasons, I did get Dragon Cup and thoroughly enjoyed them. Now, whether or not you enjoy leagues or temporary game modes in general is purely up to you, but in my opinion, leagues makes it into the S tier. And this might be my hottest take of the whole video, since I know there are plenty of people out there where leagues just simply isn't their thing. And there's nothing wrong with that for what it's worth. But the amount of excitement and dopamine I get from planning my route and then actually building something super overpowered is something that I just don't get anywhere else in the game, and that unique experience is what brings this up to the S tier for me. I also think that Jagex has done a great job keeping things fresh every season, especially with the newest starting region with Varlamore and the complex demonic pack system in the most recent league. Now we've had a really positive streak here, so it's time to crash back to reality. The next major update worth calling out is the Nightmare. And despite being released over 6 years ago, conversation about Nightmare, and specifically the Nightmare loot table, feels like it will never end. So before I completely trash this update, I will say that the Fasani's fight specifically, I do think it's a good fight, but that's pretty much all it has going for it, and it's not going to be enough to pull this out of the F tier. The uniques are way too rare, Inquisitors is too underpowered for its rarity, The staff and orb system is very janky, and the harmonized staff specifically made balancing around elemental weaknesses downright impossible. Nightmare is basically a dissertation on how not to design a drop table. And even though Jagex has buffed the table multiple times, it's still in a super out of place position and is a boss that consistently haunts the game. I might be dramatic, but I am a certified Nightmare hater, and I'm not going to change that. Alright, back to positivity. Next up, we have the clan system overhaul being released. So I think this was actually a super important update that gave more identity to countless communities around the game. On the surface, it's pretty basic. You get a clan hall and some more structure in the chat system itself, but I think the implicit effects of this update are actually much more than that. Having clan chats and friends chats separated out gives more permanence to the clan that you decide to join, and gives it more of that family-style feel that I know a lot of us were craving. Despite being an MMO, a lot of the content in this game is single player, so it's very easy to get isolated. Joining an active clan using the new clan system is like joining into a family and always gives you a home in your chat box. A little cheesy, but yeah, I'm going to put this into the A tier. Now we have combat achievements. Another somewhat divisive update, but one that I personally am definitely a fan of. When we talked about Inferno, I spoke very highly about aspirational content, and combat achievements are another way to introduce this into the game. I will not put this into S tier because I do think that a lot of the tasks feel more like busy work than actual challenges, but it fits pretty comfortably into the A tier for me, providing realistic benchmarks and goals to set and measure your PvM prowess is just a very natural, fun addition to the game. Next up is Group Iron Man. So when this was initially pitched, I didn't really see the vision for it being a successful update, and now that it's been in the game for a while, I honestly still kind of feel the same way. I've been in 2 different groups in the past, and the story was kind of the same for both of them. You create the group, everyone goes hard for about a month or so, and then you get past that dopamine-filled early game and people start to drop off slowly, usually leaving 1 or 2 people grinding for nothing and feeling like they are being alienated. Obviously, this is anecdotal and I'm not speaking for every group, but for a game that is so centered around setting and achieving personal goals, shifting those goals to team-based goals is just a difficult ask for a lot of players, and that's why I don't think the game mode suits old school super well. I won't place it in F tier because it absolutely has its place for a small minority of players that genuinely do love sharing progress with their friends, but I'll put it in D tier just because I don't think the fit is quite right for the game. Now for another infamous boss, Nex. This is another lottery-style boss, similar to Nightmare, that had a lot of people complaining about drop rates, but in my opinion, it's not nearly the same level of misstep in boss design. It's still definitely not my favorite content though. The KCing aspect of this boss makes deaths overly punishing, and also makes Master or GM combat achievements feel more like they're required than just fun cosmetics. On top of that, the drop table is a bit too rare, and also a bit bloated for my taste. The chip damage has been addressed recently, but at least when I was grinding this content out, it was simply a brew chugging simulator. However, Zerite Vambraces and the ZCB are great upgrades on top of Torva, obviously, and this is another team-based piece of content with a surprising amount of depth. I think putting it into C tier feels right to me. Next up is the 3rd raid of Old School, the Tombs of Amascut. This is personally my least favorite raid, but it's still a raid, so I can't rate it too low. I'm kind of torn between B and C tier for this one. I have had a lot of fun doing this raid with my friends, and I understand what Jagex was going for in making difficulty level dynamic and having a more accessible raid. But the issues are hard to overlook here. The invocation system is more annoying than fun, a lot of the rooms feel like a slog, and the fights are more prescriptive than places like Theater of Blood and the Olm fight. The Shadow is also a big point of contention because it really hampered what Old School can do with mage upgrades. All that being said though, I still would prefer to raid over doing a lot of the other content in the game, so I think I'm going to slide this into the B tier. We now have Forestry, which unfortunately will be joining the F tier. This update was honestly such a mess. It was over-engineered, the rewards feel completely random, and it really changed the identity of woodcutting in a negative way in my opinion. It's one of those updates where if I could just go back in time, I would not hesitate to just straight up remove it. So for that reason, it can't go anywhere other than the F tier for me. Next up is Desert Treasure 2, which is very tricky to rate. With it came 4 new excellent bosses in my opinion. I think all 4 of these bosses have a great sense of identity and a reasonable difficulty level. The awakened versions of these bosses and introduction of Blood Torva also provided one of the best sources of aspirational content in the game. However, Jagex got very experimental with how the drop tables of these bosses work, and I know I'm not alone in saying I have some issues with them. I think that having a low variance drop mechanic for the vestiges is not a problem in itself, but I do have a major gripe with how it was introduced alongside the Soul Reaper Axe pieces. Requiring 3 ring rolls for a vestige incentivizes you to camp at a specific boss, but requiring a rare piece from each different boss for the SRA incentivizes you to hop around the 4 bosses. So these drop mechanics heavily conflict with each other, which results in the loot just not feeling super good. On top of that, we of course have to mention the Awakener's Orbs, which are required to allow you to attempt some of the hardest content in the game. I would prefer if this was strictly a skill check instead of a bank value check, so that players could freely focus on improving their skill. So the TLDR is that the bosses are super well designed, but I have some major qualms with the loot tables, so I'm going to slot this into the B tier. We now have Varlamore, which was released in 3 sections, but I will be covering all at once. I think Varlamore was by far the best area expansion that Jagex has released. The artwork in Varlamore is stunning, and a lot of the content that came out with Varlamore is amazing. My favorites being Doom, Veil Totems, and of course, the Gemstone Crab. It wasn't perfect. I think that Mastering Mythology is a bit of a drag, and Colosseum, while having a lot going for it, is definitely a source of frustration with the not-so-popular modifier system. This fits pretty comfortably into the A tier for me, though. Getting into some of the more recent updates, the next thing to talk about is Yama. I don't hate or love this boss. I think the design is pretty good, although I would have loved for it to lean a bit more into the duo dynamic. Radiant Oathplate is again another great source of aspirational content, which is always a good thing. But Jagex unfortunately did not learn their lesson with having consumable items be required to attempt difficult content. Oathplate is also just too strong in my opinion. It kind of made Torva, and as a result Bandos, dead content with the exception of just a few bosses. I think this goes into the C tier for me. As much as I love the aspirational content that got released alongside the boss, the consumable contracts and meta shift in melee gear really detracts from what this update could have been. Now we have Sailing, the first ever new skill in the game. Obviously a massive discussion can be had here, but I'll try to keep things brief. I think I'm going to rate this more highly than a lot of others would and put it at the B tier actually. In my opinion, introducing a new skill sparked a lot of life into the game, and overall I think Jagex did a good job with it. There's adequate variety in training methods, and it gives so much design room for future content to come out in the following years. It is far from perfect though. Boat combat is a complete disaster, and I would also love to see the skill more integrated with the rest of the game, but I'm hoping over time my concerns here will be alleviated. And lastly, we have the new Grandmaster quest and the area expansion that just came out, Blood Moon Rises and Vampirium. The quest itself, specifically the Draken fight, was a masterpiece in my opinion, and Vampirium introduces a lot of high-level skilling methods that are very fitting for a Grandmaster quest. At the same time though, Vampirium does feel a little bit empty, and the Maggot King is not quite as interesting of a fight as I would have hoped, so I'm going to end off the tier list by placing this into the B tier. that will do it. That was a lot of yapping. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with some of the ratings that I had, or if you like videos like this in the future. Please drop a like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.